For item 6, so we'll be doing the budget amendment for the unfunded deputies before the resolution approving the settlement 19CH 190. Clerk Amal, we call the roll.
Mr. Arena?
Here.
Mr. Billich?
Here.
Mr. Boomer?
Here.
Mr. Booker? Mr. Butita?
Here.
Mrs. Crosby?
Here.
Mr. Fellers?
Here.
Mr. Fiducia?
Here.
Mr. Gurl?
Present.
Mrs. Gorel?
Present.
Mr. Hoffman?
Present.
Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Mr. McDonald?
Present.
Mr. Neighbors?
Present.
Mrs. Red? Mr. Salgado?
Present.
Mr. Schultz?
Here.
Mr. Tassoni?
Present.
Mr. Webster?
Here.
Mr. Westcott?
Present.
18 present, 2 absent, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Clerk Amal. I will turn it over to Mr. Billich for the invocation and pledge.
Dear Lord, we thank you for giving us a beautiful day today and the wonderful county we live in. We ask that you continue to protect all of us, and especially our first responders who put their life on the line for us, our troops and veterans for protecting our freedoms, and all those who continue to fight for a better future for us all. Please watch over us as we make the best decisions that we possibly can, and please, dear God, pray for us all. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have no awards, proclamations, presentations, public hearings or tonight. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, I will bypass the statement. Board member correspondence. Any board members with correspondence? Mr. Westcott.
Thank you. I'd like to take and ask for a moment of silence to, in memory of our good friend Arnie Cabello, father of John Cabello, former county board member and now state representative. If we could just have a moment of silence. Thank you.
Any other board members? Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, being that this is Ms. Pascal's last regular meeting, right? I just wanted to say what a pleasure it was to work with you, and I think you did excellent work while you were here, and I think you truly made a lasting difference for the county. So thank you very much.
Any other board members? Okay, I have one thing here. I received the following letter from 2 of my constituents. We, the undersigned, don't think the attached article will sway anyone from working towards the building of a casino in the city of Rockford. We do think the information presented should be taken into consideration as decisions are made. Neither of us object to gambling on purely moral grounds. The argument presented in the article are primarily concerned with the impact gambling has on individuals with regards to addiction and the industry's need to cultivate addiction as a core component of its business plan. How does this square with the effort to bring the Family Peace Center into being? Why make it easier than it is to spread addiction? It is true that building the facility provides some sorely needed employment for construction trades, but those jobs evaporate in a few months, and the employment created for casino operation are mostly low-paid service positions. Something the article points out that should be a serious concern is the risk of lawsuits over product liability. We will let you read the article and discover the nugget of information for yourself. We believe the casino to be a bad idea. We understand that some Rockford and Winnebago County residents are problem gamblers, and they're taking their money to other states. But we see no justification to make it easier for them to destroy themselves and their families than it already is. Sincerely, Gain McClendon and Wanda Hoover. Clerk, I'm going to ask you to make copies of those and place them in the mailboxes. Thank you. There is any other board member correspondence? Okay, well, there is no chairman's report. Announcements and communications. Clerk Gamal.
Mr. Chairman, the items listed below were received as correspondence.
Thank you, Clerk Gamal. Those will be placed on file. Moving on, I need a motion for the consent agenda. A motion by Mr. Boomer, second by Mr. Jazz. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. County Administrator Report. Administrator Pascal.
Thank you. Very briefly, this week on Tuesday, we had the open house for the Wellness Center. A handful of employees attended. We're really excited about the new look of the Wellness Center and the attentiveness of the staff from Swedes. We're very hopeful that this will provide more utilization of the Wellness Center. They've got some great ideas, and I'm really excited for the county. On Tuesday, July 30th, I'll be meeting with Prairie Forge. They've conducted all of their interviews with all of the stakeholders surrounding the public safety building project. I feel like they've done a very, very thorough job. We've been really happy with the discussions we've had so far, and I'll provide you a written update of the results of that meeting. Last week, Bill Crawley and myself met with representatives of Baker Tilly as they finished their reviews of IT and purchasing. We have a full exit meeting planned also for Tuesday, July 30th, and they'll provide a draft report of the results to us at that time. I'll update you again in a memo of the results, and then they'll be providing you a final report within the next month or so. Thank you.
Thank you, Administrator Pascal. Any department head updates? Okay, we'll move on to our standing committees. Finance Committee, Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Committee has 7 items before you tonight, so I will get started on the first one. It's a resolution approving subcontractor agreements for domestic violence enhanced training and services to end abuse in later life grant.
May I have a motion? Motion by Mr. Gurl, second by Mr. Hoffman. Any discussion?
Yeah, I can real quickly speak to it. Mr. Jakoway kind of spoke to this about we're having 3 subcontractors, Remedies, Rockford Sexual Counseling, and I believe Mercy Health, trying to help out with domestic violence on the aspect of training for police officers and obviously staff as well on that. And so this obviously passed unanimously, so I just wanted to talk to it a little bit.
Mrs. Gorel.
I want to thank you for that, because of the fact in our community we have needed that desperately. We've had too many incidents where perhaps someone was arrested and no one recognized, the officers didn't recognize that the person was in crisis. And we started this several years ago, and then it got dropped because of financing. So I'm happy to see that we're going back into that program, and hopefully we will have less incidents. And not only that, we will have less lawsuits because of it. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item we have is Budget Amendment 2019-025, legal fees to be laid over.
Okay.
So I will go ahead and would like to motion to suspend the rules.
Okay, I have a motion to suspend the rules, a second by Mr. Gurl. Any discussion on suspending the rules? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We have suspended the rules.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move to approve Budget Amendment 2019-025, legal fees.
Okay, I have a motion, second by Mr. Gurl. Real quick, Mr. Kurlinkus, with 2 members absent, how many votes are required to pass this evening?
Budget amendments require 114.
114, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. 1 no vote, please cast a no vote for Mr. Schultz. Motion passes. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next item is Budget Amendment 2019-026, dental sealant program to be laid over. And I would like to motion to suspend the rules and vote on this tonight.
I have a motion to suspend the rules, seconded by Mrs. Gorel. Any discussion on suspending the rules? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We have suspended the rules. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move to approve Budget Amendment 2019-026 Dental Sealant Program.
I have a motion to approve Budget Amendment 2019-026. May I have a second? Second by Mr. Hoffman. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next item is Budget Amendment 2019-027 Regional Planning Economic Development Salaries to be laid over, and I would like to move to suspend the rules and vote on this today.
I have a motion to suspend the rules. May I have a second? Second by Mr. Webster. Any discussion on suspending the rules? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The rules are suspended. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move to approve Budget Amendment 2019-027 Regional Planning and Economic Development Salaries.
I have a motion to approve Budget Amendment 2019-027, seconded by Mr. Gurl. Any discussion on this budget amendment? Mrs. Crosby.
Point of clarification, it is my understanding that and I'm all for the salary increase, that this is retroactive back to October?
I don't know. Miss Pascal?
Yes, October 1st.
Rationale?
Chris's salary has been significantly lower than other department heads for a number of years, and I felt like we owed it to him to make it right for fiscal year 19.
My only concern on that is you would never see this in the private sector, have a salary retroactive for 8 or 9 months. So I know Chris does great work and he's good at what he does, but add that up for me. How much money is that?
The budget amendment here is, the increase is $17,500.
Okay, so, and that's
So
monthly.
divided by however you want to, when it starts.
So what's the total on that? Retroactive?
Well, it'd be 17,500 divided by 12 times 9 would be the retroactive.
I gotta figure it out myself, huh?
Okay,
So the total is 13,000?
Correct.
The total is for the 8 or 9 months retroactive, it's 13,000.
Correct.
I'm good with that.
Okay,
I'm good
Miss-
with that.
thank you, Ms. Crosby. Ms. Gurl?
Thank you, Chairman, Acting Chairman. 13,000 is really very little compared to how much money Chris has saved us in that department just because we haven't had to hire all these consultants. We would have been buried and never been able to even give him a raise. And he's been the leader in that department of making sure that our fees were readjusted so that that department was never in a hole. He's well deserving of that, and I can't see anyone else I would rather give that money to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gurl. Mr. Westcott?
Yes, I agree with Angie on this, and Chris has earned his keep, to say the least, and I hope we'll all pass this and move forward. Thank you.
I'll go to Mr. Webster first and then Mrs. Crosby. Mr. Webster?
Yeah, thank you. This salary, even with the increase, is probably much lower than other persons that would have this position in other similar counties as this. Quite a bit lower, I'm sure. And so when you have someone that does a stellar job, which this man has, I've known him for all these years since he's been here, and he's been over, above, and beyond the call of duty, as far as I'm concerned, in a very quiet, unassuming way. And I can't think of anybody that would deserve a raise like this better than he. Like so many of our county positions, a lot of them in our different departments and so forth, they could walk at any time and find a job, because these kind of people are in demand, and find a job easily that pays more with less stress probably. So I'd say full steam ahead with that pay raise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Mrs. Crosby?
I think you all missed when I said I'm good with it.
Is there any further discussion on this budget amendment? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Please cast a no vote for Mr. Schultz. Mr. Salgado?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item is, we moved it from 8 to 6, so it is Budget Amendment 2019-029, Sheriff Unfunded Deputies. And I would like to motion to suspend the rules and vote on this tonight.
Okay, I have a motion to suspend the rules, seconded by Mr. Boomer. Any discussion on suspending the rules? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We have suspended the rules. Mr. Salgado?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to approve Budget Amendment 2019-029, Sheriff Unfunded Deputies.
Okay, I have a motion for Budget Amendment 2019-029 by Mr. Salgado, seconded by Mr. Boomer. Any discussion? Mrs. Crosby?
Just a question. I had a constituent call me and I couldn't answer the question. Where exactly are we getting the $300,000 from the deficit? We paid out 1.4, correct? And we owe 300. So exactly where does that come from?
The public safety.
The public safety sales tax fund balance.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
I have two opposed, Mr. Schultz and Mr. Salgado. Motion carries. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item on our agenda is a resolution approving the settlement of 19-CH-190, which is a settlement sheriff's lawsuit.
Okay, I have a resolution. May I have a motion? Motion by Mr. Hoffman. May I have a second? Second by Mr. McDonald. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
All right, let's have a roll call, please. Yep, resolution, this is resolution approving the settlement 19-CH-190, settlement of the sheriff's lawsuit. Clerk, come out. Will you please call the roll?
Mr. Billich?
Yes.
Mr. Boomer?
Yes.
Mr. Butita?
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby?
Yes.
Mr. Fellers?
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia?
Yes.
Mr. Gurl?
Yes.
Mrs. Gorl?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors?
Yes.
Mr. Salgado?
No.
Mr. Schultz?
No.
Mr. Tassoni?
Yes.
Mr. Webster?
Yes.
Mr. Westcott?
Yes.
Mr. Arena?
Yes.
17, Motion,
16-2, the motion carries. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our final item today is a budget amendment, 2019-028, children's waiting room funding, and I'd like to motion to suspend the rules on this.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Salgado to suspend the rules on Budget Amendment 2019-028. May I have a second, please? Second by Mr. Gurl. Any discussion on suspending the rules? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The rules are suspended. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I move to approve Budget Amendment 2019-028, children's waiting room funding.
I have a motion to approve Budget Amendment 2019-028 by Mr. Salgado, seconded by Mr. Boomer. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So real quickly, I know that we're working on the budget process right now, so I'm hoping that in the coming week, we can have some sort of revenue projections. I know we talked about the expenditures at our last Finance Committee. So hopefully, once we have that, we can present, obviously, to the Finance Committee and then to the board to kind of look at the projections where we're going to end up next budget cycle. So for that, so I'm kind of eager to look at that, and hopefully we get the insurance expenditures that we were kind of promised, or not promised, but told that we were going to get, so we can get the ball rolling on that for the next budget cycle. So that concludes my report, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Moving on, Economic Development Committee. Sorry, hold on one second. Mr. Webster.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Jaime, for the work that you have done. I just want to say that I'm glad that we finally put this issue to rest with our back and forth with the sheriff for God knows how many months here now. I look forward to this having a little closure. I don't know that it'll exactly be a kumbaya moment, but I'm glad it is behind us, and I hope that this does not happen again after our next budget is presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Mr. Billich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today for Economic Development Committee, we did have a resolution allocating $5,000 of the host fee allocations for fiscal year 2019 to keeping families and communities together, KFACT, as for approval.
Thank you. May I have a motion on the resolution? May I have a motion? Motion by Mr. Girl, seconded by Mr. Neighbors. Any discussion on the resolution allocating $5,000 of the host fee allocations?
We did lay it over just to have a brief presentation. I do believe either Shamika Williams or Rebecca Nugren might be here to present on that. Could you come on up here and kind of give a brief description for us?
Good evening. I am Shamika Williams, the founder and executive director of KFACT, which is an acronym for Keeping Families and Communities Together. And what we do at KFACT is mentor at-risk children here in Rockford between the ages of 6th grade through college, through post-secondary education. We currently have 250 girls in our program. We have a waiting list of 75 girls. And to date, we have a 100% high school graduation rate. 98% of our girls live in Winnebago County. And all 98% of them, we have a 98% percentage success rate for girls pursuing post-secondary education. So vocational programming, armed services, four-year universities. So we've been mentoring since 2009, myself personally. After being laid off at the Winnebago County Health Department, I did prevention education for a number of years. And so we continue to do that through the middle schools and high schools here in Rockford is what we do. And we have a location at Second First Church. Trying to think what else, just a short overview. I don't know if you guys have any questions I can answer, but that's what we do. And the whole purpose of KFACT is to make sure that girls do not continue to live in generational poverty. And we do that through education. So they have to make a commitment to post-secondary education as one way to alleviate generational poverty. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Do you have any questions? Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What is the primary source of funding for your organization?
Our primary source of funding right now is local foundations and community donations. We don't receive any state or federal funding.
Okay.
So our largest amount of funding we received so far has come from community foundations of Northern Illinois, as well as the Club Blue grant in 2017.
I see. And then how long have you been in existence?
We've been a nonprofit since 2014, 501c3, and I've been personally mentoring since 2009, so about 10 years.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So we have, this has been motioned and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? We have a no vote by Mr. Schultz. Motion carries. Mr. Billich.
All right, our next resolution is to donate $5,000 to the Rockford Area Convention and Visitors Bureau, RICVB, to support the Fred Van Vliet celebration.
I have a motion.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Motion by Mr. Westcott, seconded by Mr. Girl. Any discussion on the resolution before us? Mr. Billich, did you want to add anything?
I just wanted to say that if anybody does have any questions, Martisha Brown has been wonderful and has actually answered a lot of the questions that we had for the committee. So, I mean, Like I said, she's here to answer any questions if anybody does have any.
Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wondering, have you closed the, you said it was $65,000 expense. We were contributing $5,000 of that here. Have you raised the other funds to pay for that event?
As of now, we have not raised the complete fund, so any gap would be supported by the RACV's operational budget.
And were you able to find out what that is?
Yes, around $3 million.
That's your budget?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Please cast a no vote for Mr. Schultz. Motion carries. Mr. Billich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And next, we have a resolution granting authority to the Winnebago County Board Chairman to execute the documents necessary to complete a loan for $200,000 from Winnebago County host fees for the recapitalization of Northern Illinois Community Development Corporation program to Northern Illinois Community Development Corporation, NICDC. I so move.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Billich. We have a second. Second by Mr. Butita. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I have a no vote from Mr. Schultz. Resolution carries. Mr. Billich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes our report.
Up next, we have the Personnel and Policies Committee. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have just two to read in and a report to do. The first one I have to read in, that's why I'm not going to come up, is an ordinance amending Section 2-89 of the County Court of Ordinances appointment of department heads. That's to be laid over.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia.
Next one is an ordinance amending Section 2168 of County Court of Ordinances and the Human Resource Director. That's to be laid over.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. Ms. Gold, do you have a question?
I don't have a question. What I'd like to do is make an amendment, and I don't remember if I'm on the right one or not. This is the one for the appointment of department heads.
So, Ms.
You haven't
Gold.
done that one yet? That's
Yeah,
next.
no, these are just in for the first reading, so they're laying over.
I understand that, and since they are for the first reading. Can't amend it on the first reading. Can't do it now?
Yeah, we
Thank
cannot
you.
amend on the first reading. Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you.
Sir, hold on one second, sorry. Do you have another question? Okay. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you. I just want to report that our committee appointed Mr. Arena as an ad hoc chair, and this committee is going to look at best practices for administration, structure, and appointment of chair, and it also is going to look at the best practices for the county board chair moving forward. Next item is animal stories, and Animal Services had 981 calls for service. 623 of those was in the city of Rockford, 143 in unincorporated Winnebago County. McChesney had 83, Loves Park had 44, Rockton had 12, Roscoe 20, South Beloit 27, Durand 5, Pecatonica 4, Winnebago 7, New Milford 2, and Cherry Valley 10. We have 59 dogs, 83 cats, 1 ferret, 1 guinea pig, 1 gerbil, 6 fish, and 3 domestic rabbits and a hamster at Animal Services. So if anybody's interested in coming out and getting a hamster or fish, feel free to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. Just real quick, it looks like both Mr. Girl and Mr. Salgado are interested in that hamster.
Okay, that was good. That was
Mr. Girl, go ahead.
Hey, Chairman, I just wanted to check on the update on the tarantula. Did someone come and get him? Did he escape? I just need to know.
You know what? You know what? I can call out there tomorrow because I definitely would have took a shoe to that thing, but I'll definitely let you know on that. I would like to also, on behalf of myself and my personnel, or my PP committee as we call it, thank Carla for everything she's done for this county. I know that she's given a lot emotionally and mentally, and I'm personally going to miss her, and I think everybody on this board is really not understanding what a loss that we are going to have. And so on behalf of myself and my PP committee, I would like to thank you. That concludes my report.
Mr. Salgado?
Yeah, I'm not here for the hamster yet, but I wanted, sorry. I was wondering if I could suspend the rules on the ordinance today. So I'd like to move to suspend the rules and vote on it today. Can I?
Real quick, Mr. Kalinkas, we've moved on. Can we continue action on this? Okay. So which ordinance is that, Mr. Salgado?
Both of them, actually. And I can explain why once we get
Okay,
there.
well, okay, go ahead, Mr. Kalinkas. One at a time? All right, we'll do these one at a time then. So I have a motion on an ordinance amending section 289 of the County Code of Ordinances, the appointment of the department head. May I have a second on suspending the rules? A second by Mrs. Gorel. Any discussion on suspending the rules? Mr. Salgado?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason why I want to suspend the rules is since we got Carla, and I think we got the memo here of the letter of resignation, extending it to August 30th. I believe that if we can get the process started sooner than later, and trying to figure out, both the county administrator, the chief human resources director, the CFO, whatever in that process, if we can get that ball rolling now, I think if we pass these ordinance, it would be, we would save ourselves 2 weeks, potentially even more on that aspect of it. Not saying the search, but trying to get someone in the door so we can actually work with Carla and kind of, because if August 2nd would occur next week, essentially we'd be with no one to work with her on that aspect of it. So that's why I'm suspending the rules. I'd like to suspend it.
Okay. Any other comments on suspending the rules? Seeing none, all those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? No. Okay, we're going to go ahead and do a roll call vote here. Yep, the motion, the motion is to suspend the rules so that we may vote on ordinance amending section 289 of the County Code of Ordinances. Clerk, come out.
Mr. Boomer? Yes. Mr. Butita?
No.
Mrs. Crosby? No. Mr. Fellers?
No.
Mr. Fiducia? Yes. Mr. Gurl?
No.
Mrs. Gorel?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
No.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors?
Yes.
Mr. Salgado?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni?
Yes.
Mr. Webster?
Yes.
Mr. Westcott?
Yes.
Mr. Arena?
Yes.
Mr. Billich?
Yes.
Motion passes.
13 to 5, correct?
Correct.
Okay. 11, thank you. The rules are suspended.
2 absent.
Yep. Thank you, yes. Yep, 13 to 5 with 2 absent. The rules are suspended. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'd like to move to approve an ordinance amending section 2-89 of the County Code of Ordinance, appointment of department heads.
Okay, I have a motion to approve ordinance amending section 289 of the County Code of Ordinances, seconded by Mr. Westcott. Any discussion? Mrs. Gorel.
I'm for the suspension, but I'd still like to get my amendment in on this one.
So we have suspended the rules, so you may make your motion now.
On B, I would like to have it read, the county administrator and 2 county board members, 1 from each political party, shall review the performance of all appointed department heads. We really can't have just one person. We need to have we need to have the main person and 2 of our county board members always be in on decisions like that. and then they can bring it to us as a whole.
Hey, did you have a copy of that written down?
Sure you do.
Okay.
I just wrote down, all it is that after the county administrator, Bill Reed, and 2 county board members from each political party. One from each political party, sorry about that, thank you.
Okay, I have a motion to amend.
Mr. Chairman, can I add something to that?
No, we've got a motion in, so I'll need a second first. We've got a motion to amend the ordinance as presented, to read as Ms. Gorel stated. May I have a second, please?
Didn't we have a second?
No, this is for
Prescott, and this is the discussion?
No, this is for the amendment.
Okay.
Right. So I have a second by Mr. Arena. Okay. So hold on one second. We are on amendment number 1. Any discussion on the amendment as presented by Mr. Gorel? Mr. Hoffman?
The only concern I had on that is it's too vague when you say a person from each party. I think we need somebody to designate what person from each party. So I would ask that we have the caucus chair designate that person, just so we don't have, we have to have some kind of order how that person gets involved.
Okay. Mr. Kelly?
This could be a matter of policy. It doesn't really need to be enshrined in an ordinance.
Mrs. Gorel?
I disagree. We've been so wishy-washy on ordinances and policies. It's time we start getting down to the nitty-gritty and be more specific in what we're doing. I also agree with Mr. Hoffman that we would have both of our county caucus leaders there, if possible. If not, then that perhaps they can reassign someone to their position if they can't happen to get away that day.
Okay, so if we want to move forward on this, I would need a motion by Mr. Hoffman or a motion by somebody to amend the amendment.
I'll make that amendment.
Okay, can you clarify, could you read out exactly what it will read?
Where it gets to, prior to getting to the person from each party, that, or after, it's saying added, nominated, or chosen by the caucus chairs of each party.
So that would read, and 2 county board members chosen by the caucus chairs of each party.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, give me one moment. All right, I have an amendment, I have a motion to amend Mrs. Gorel's amendment. May I have a second, please? Second by Mr. Arena. Any discussion on Mr. Hoffman's amendment to Mrs. Gorel's amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. I have no votes from Mr. Schultz and Mrs. Crosby, is that correct? Okay. We have amended the amendment. Now I have a motion and a second on the amended amendment from Mrs. Gorel. Is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. All right, I've got no votes from Mrs. Crosby, Mr. Kelly, and Mr. Schultz. Okay, the motion to amend the ordinance passes. I now have an amended ordinance. That would be ordinance amending section 2-89 of the County Code of Ordinances as amended by Mrs. Gorel and Mr. Hoffman. Is there any discussion on the amended ordinance? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. I have no votes from Mr. Kelly, Mrs. Crosby, and please cast a no vote for me. Motion passes. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to, a motion to approve an ordinance amending Section 2-168 of the County Code of Ordinance, Human Resource Director.
Thank you. I have a motion by Mr. Salgado amending, ordinance amending Section 2-168 of the County Code of Ordinances. May I please have a second? Oh, I'm sorry. We need to, thank you.
I retract my motion here and actually motion to suspend the rules to vote on this ordinance tonight.
Okay, I have a motion to suspend the rules by Mr. Salgado. May I please have a second? Seconded by Mr. Westcott. Any discussion on suspending the rules? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. I have no votes from Mr. Kelly. Okay, let's go ahead and just do a roll call.
Okay, can you repeat
Yep.
the motion?
Yes,
Mr.
we have a
Chairman?
motion to suspend the rules so we may vote on ordinance amending section 2-168 of the County Code of Ordinances. Clerk, come out.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Butita? Mrs. Crosby? No. Mr. Fellers?
No.
Mr. Fiducia? Yes. Mr. Gurl? No. Mrs. Gorl?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
No.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors?
Pass.
Mr. Salgado?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni?
Yes.
Mr. Webster? Mr. Westcott?
Yes.
Mr. Arena?
Yes.
Mr. Billich?
Yes.
Mr. Boomer?
Yes.
And Mr. Neighbors?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries. We have suspended the rules.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move to approve an ordinance amending section 2-168 of the County Code of Ordinance, Human Resource Director.
Thank you. I have a motion to ordinance amending section 2-168 of the County Code of Ordinances. May I have a second, please? Seconded by Mr. Boomer. Any discussion? Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for the state's attorney. This was amended in committee to add the sentence, "in the absence of an interim administrator." And I'm wondering, should the word interim, is that necessary to be in there? Or would it cover more circumstances if it just said "in the absence of an administrator"?
I think it would be better to have in the absence of an administrator. You don't really need the word interim.
Then I would like to move that we strike the word interim from the ordinance.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Arena amending section 2-168, striking the word interim, with a second by Mr. Hoffman. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of amending the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Please cast a no vote for Ms. Crosby. Okay, we have amended the ordinance amending section 2-168. Is there any further discussion on this ordinance? Seeing none, Clerk Como, I'm just going to ask you to go ahead and call the roll right now for the ordinance amending section 2-168 of the County Code of Ordinances, the Human Resources Director.
Mr. Butita?
No.
Mrs. Crosby?
No.
Mr. Fellers?
No.
Mr. Fiducia?
Yes.
Mr. Gurl?
No.
Mrs. Gorl?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
No.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors?
Yes.
Mrs. Red?
Absent.
Mr. Salgado?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni?
Yes.
Mr. Webster?
Yes.
Mr. Westcott?
Yep.
Mr. Arena?
Yes.
Mr. Billich?
Yes.
Mr. Boomer?
Yes.
Motion carries.
13-5 with 2 absent. The motion carries. Mr. Salgado.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason why I wanted to do this was because Mr. Fiducia's essentially committee appointed a subcommittee. So it is prudent at this time to get the process going. And I think once now they have those ordinance out of the way, we can continue to do what we need to do and work in that direction. So that's why the push for this. It wasn't because I wanted to do something about it, but it's just more importantly to get the process and going forward. So the subcommittee can continue to do what they're supposed to be doing and find those candidates, obviously, to fill those positions. So that's why I did what I did. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Mr. Girl, comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with my colleague, Mr. Salgado, about the timeliness and getting this process moved forward. I would just urge us that we follow through with this process and do our due diligence and not act without the process being completed and everybody in acknowledge of what is the process. So I would encourage us to do our homework and make sure that we have this right before we act on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Girl. Mr. Mrs. Girl. No, you're okay. Go ahead. You're okay.
Thank you. The other thing that I want to ask Mr. Fiducia in our committee, because I'm on this committee also, is that after our recent breach in personnel records that went to the public that should never have happened, I would encourage our committee to go back and review the recidivism policy. You know, this has been one of the saddest things that has happened to our board, is to have information, personal information, actually leaked out to the public. That should never have happened. And as I look up on that wall, I see this sign, this wording that says respect and accountability. And that's what we need to have more of among all of us. And I'd like to have us go back over that recidivism policy for our responsibility protecting our staff and the members of our Winnebago County community. We really need to go back and do that. Just a suggestion, Mr. Fiducia. So I hope we can go forward and get this done.
Thank you, Mrs. Girl. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mrs. Goro, we will review that nepotism policy again, and what we will do is we will work hand in hand with the state's attorney, and we will also look into your concerns about the breaches in some of our personnel records. So yes, the nepotism policy will be looked into by the state's attorney. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. Mr. Webster?
No, I was just going to say that I think Ms. Gorel meant nepotism as opposed to recidivism, if I'm not mistaken. And she's absolutely correct. Any breaches in anyone's personnel file, there's no end to the damage people can do with personal information to someone. It could go as far as destroying their reputations, their lives, their futures. So that's something that should not be taken lightly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Ms. Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to just make a statement regarding Mrs. Gorel's comments about the breach that appeared in the paper. And what I would like to say is, based upon the drafting of the Kern County nepotism policy, I did not find that any of those employees that were listed on that list that was published had violated that policy. So I just wanted to state that in fairness to those employees whose name were listed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. State's Attorney Ross. Mr. Fiducia, this is your committee report. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Thank God I didn't come up there. No.
All right, I'm going to assume we are concluding the Personnel and Policies Committee report. Zoning Committee, Mr. Webster.
I won't be coming up there either. We have nothing.
No report. Okay. Operations Administrative Committee, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Fellers. We have no report for tonight. We have been working on the landfill issue in the background. We're also working on the trustee program. You'll see that come through committees next week, but there's no report for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Public Works Committee, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Chairman. We have no report.
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Public Safety Committee, Mr. Booker is absent. Mrs. Red's absent. No report. Any unfinished business? Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly, I would just strongly encourage us that while we have many wonderful nonprofit organizations in our community, we need to stop acting as though we have money to spend that we don't actually have. And I'm speaking particularly of the host fee allocations. I think we've opened the door for every nonprofit in our community to come forward and make an ask, and while they're doing good work, we have our own challenges and our own financial obligations to meet first. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Mr. Salgado?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to address something, the vote on the sheriff's lawsuit. Just want to be crystal clear on this. By no means the vote that I took today was a no, was that I don't support public safety. Actually, Mr. Fellers and I, if you recall, we were here at, on the chambers here, trying to negotiate to essentially keep the 24 deputies on the payroll, so we wouldn't have to have layoffs. So I just want to bring that up. However, with everything that has transpired with the lawsuit, I believe that, I thought we had a deal with attrition to make, obviously, their cuts. It wasn't granted. So therefore, because we shook on a deal, and Mr. Gary Caruana agreed to it, that's why I voted no on this case, because to me, it was kind of like not a slap on the face, but essentially I agree, but then I don't agree. And so from my standpoint, that's why I voted no on it today. I just want to be crystal clear that for myself, there has nothing to do with that I don't support police officers, fires, or first responders. More importantly, it was because we came up with a deal that obviously would keep those 24 deputies on the payroll with the essentially conditions to work with attrition to recover those 1.7, whatever it was, for those 24 deputies. So I just want to make it clear and go on the record for that. And I have no problem with supporting public safety as long as we have, the adequate funding, because it is our due diligence to do so to represent the citizens of Winnebago County. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. I have Mr. Hoffman next.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for, this is for legal point of clarification. 3 of the last 4 meetings, county board meetings, we've had a substitute county board chair. And the question I have is, does that substitute chairman have the same rules as the permanent chairman, or, for instance, voting from up there, asking questions from up there? I'm not opposed to it. I'm just not against Mr. Fellers. He's done a fine job. But I'm just asking the question, does the substitute follow the same rules as the chairman? But he has been.
The substitute chairman, or, for example, Mr. Fellers, retains their position as county board member. Therefore, they basically would have a dual role. They're conducting the meeting, but they do not abrogate their voting rights and their discussion rights, because they are sitting in the chairman's chair presiding over the county board meeting.
Well, the only question I asked that was because I thought that was it, but on the other hand, we talked about the person had to be on the board floor to ask questions, so that's why I asked it, but that's fine. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, yeah, okay. Mr. Gurl.
Thank you, Chairman. Follow up on Mr. Hoffman's question, or at least kind of reverb off of that. Question of the state's attorney. I know as a county board member, if I miss so many meetings, I am entitled to lose my pay. Does that coincide with the chairman?
My understanding of the elected officials, such as the chairman, you do not have a limited number of vacation days, so to speak, because you're an elected official countywide. So you manage your time accordingly to your schedule, so you're not limited like regular employees. Presiding over county board meetings is just one of the functions of the chairman, but he is not restricted on whether or not he has someone preside over those meetings for him.
Is there a minimum amount of hours that an elected official, chairman, or anyone else has to put in to receive their pay? Can the individual not show up, not work at all, and still be entitled to pay?
That's my understanding. For example, with my position as state's attorney, and you have this in some counties, that's just not my work ethic, but some of them are allowed to have private practices. Some of them don't come into the office at all. I come into the office and I set my schedule around my office hours, but the statute does allow that flexibility with elected officials. And technically, with my position, you work 24 hours a day technically because you could be on call. But to answer your questions, there's no limited number of hours that you, quote, have to put in to receive your salary, and that's by state statute and Illinois Constitution.
Excellent, thank you. And I have one other, and this is not on that topic, but as far as what Mr. Schultz was saying about the host fees and spending money, I have to agree with him on certain things that we are spending host fee monies on. I think some of these projects or nonprofits could fall underneath the public safety sales tax fund and spare our host fee fund from these. Is there any way that we can get clarification on exactly what can be spent out of the public safety sales tax as far as health, safety to the community, as far as what we can spend legally out of that pot of money? Because I think we would find that some of the money that we're spending out of host fees probably should have been spent out of that public safety sales tax. So maybe if we can have our public safety sales, or not safe, our public safety committee and possibly finance, look at that and look at the ordinance and see if we are following best practices and if we are actually doing what we should be doing or if we could be doing something differently.
I think that's a prudent suggestion, and certainly my staff is available to sit in on those committees to review that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gurl. Mr. Webster.
Yeah, to get back to a question or two ago there, so to be clear on this, from what I understand, the chairman has rarely been in the office in the last 6 weeks. So like in a handful of times he's been there. And so then it doesn't matter how many days he's not there, he still gets his full pay?
As I indicated, the chairman is an elected official county-wide, and those are the rules. The chairman does not have a supervisor. The chairman, like all elected officials, respond to their constituency. And yes, that's correct.
That's kind of, I don't know, doesn't seem right. But anyways, I thought that somewhere when I first got on the county board and I was told what the county board wage was, and it was based on, back then, it was based on $100 per diem per meeting back in the day, and that's how they came up with your salary. And back then, if you missed more than 3 meetings, then you got dinged that $100. And so I guess there's nothing pertaining to that anymore either then?
I'd have to look at that ordinance. I'm referencing the state statute that applies to the chairman's position, since that was the question. But I'd have to look at the county ordinance regarding the deficit in pay should you miss a meeting. So I'd have to look at that.
Yeah, because I think taxpayers, and I am one, it'd be pretty disturbing to find out that either as a board member or even as the chairman, you wouldn't have to appear in the office 1 day out of the year and you'd still get your full pay. And I don't know that taxpayers feel very comfortable with that notion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Is there any other unfinished business? Unfinished?
No,
Or new business?
I'm going to call it new business.
All right, new business, Mr. Westcott.
Yes, thank you. During a social media rant the other day, a local Cub reporter made this statement to me, and I think that, everybody would like to hear this. He says, the other day I was driving down South Prairieville in my car, and I hit a pothole. Made me think of you. And I appreciate that, Mr. Guerrero.
Mr. Westcott. Mr. Schultz? Hold on one moment. Go ahead, Mr. Kalinkas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to tell everybody who wasn't aware of the fact that we had our first 911 meeting with the municipalities yesterday. And Mr. Boomer and Mr. Salgado and Mr. McDonald all attended that, along with County Administrator Pascal and myself. And it was, I think, a very productive meeting. I think we moved a couple of hurdles closer to having this. And the next meeting has been set for August 14th at 5 p.m. And of course, it'll be posted and it'll be a meeting open to the public. So I just wanted to make sure that the board knew that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kalinkas. We have one item on the agenda for new business, and that's the appointment of an acting county administrator. Is there any discussion regarding the appointment of an acting county administrator that anyone wants to make at this time? Okay, in that case, I will take a motion to adjourn.
One more thing.
Oh, sorry, Mrs. Gall.
I'm sorry, I didn't think about it sooner. But on August 6th, put it on your calendar, River Bluff Nursing Home, 5:30. They're going to feed you dinner, and we want as many of you to come out there, see what's going on. You'll be able to talk to the staff. They're going to tell you what they're doing. And our recent count now is over, I believe, 190. So that means we've been doing some good staffing out there, and we're progressing. We would like to have all you members come out, attend, listen to everyone. I'll send out a flyer on it, but in the meantime, mark your calendar, if you can, for August 6th. It's on a Tuesday at 5.
Thank you, Mrs. Gall. Clerk Kummer, will you make sure that information is distributed to board members?
Angie, do you have a flyer on that?
I will do that.
Okay, thank you. Nothing, Mr. Gall. Okay. Is there any other new business? I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Hoffman, seconded by Mrs. Crosby. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.
I could not keep up with you.